part of the University of Sheffield's participation in the UK-wide Festival of Social Science. Today we're going to be discussing the role of schools in urban communities, how they've dealt with the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, and what roles schools can play in addressing climate change and other environmental challenges. We are interested in how we might think of schools differently, not as instruments to deliver state policies, but as allies to families in areas where there are multiple challenges that face them in everyday life. We will be looking at how COVID means more than the provision of digital technology and has cast a light on the positive and negative implications of the role of schools as frontline services. And we're also going to be discussing what discretion and autonomy schools have to think beyond education to climate change, the wider environment and neighbourhood in the context of COP26. So I'm Professor Beth Perry. I'm the Director of the Urban Institute at the University of Sheffield. I'm joined by my colleagues at the University of Sheffield here, Miguel Kanai in the Department of Geography and Alison Buxton in the Department of Education, and we've co-organised this session here today. I've been working alongside a local primary school in Sheffield, Arbourthorne Community Primary School, to learn from their initiative called An Even Better Arbourthorne. At the Urban Institute, we're interested in what kinds of organisations can play roles of agents, can play roles in their communities as agents of sustainable urban development, and what kind of institutions can build community capacity and support different kinds of allyship within communities. What does it mean to work with communities, seeing them not as deprived or underprivileged, but as full of potential, innovation and positive energy for change? And you can find out more about the An Even Better Arbourthorne project through an online showcase we've also co-curated as part of this festival with volunteers and participants at the school. And I think the link will be posted in the chat. So today's event will involve structured discussion with our panel for an hour until around 5:30. We will then take questions, answers and reflections from you. Everyone is muted and cameras off, but you can post questions to the panelists using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And you can also post comments, reflections, or any links to your own work that attendees might find useful in the chat. We're also recording the event, which will feature the panelists and the participants so that we can share this afterwards. Finally, before we start, I'll just say that due to GDPR rules, we can't access everyone's details, who's registered. So if you are interested in staying in touch with this work or finding out anything more about the initiatives and projects you hear about today, you can get in touch with me or my colleagues. So without any further ado, I will introduce the panel. So first we have Vanessa Langley. Vanessa is in her 14th year as head teacher of Arbourthorne Community Primary School in Sheffield. She's passionate about improving life chances and wider outcomes for families living in challenging circumstances through innovative partnerships and by growing a culture of high ambition, resilience, enthusiasm, and ensuring a focus on family and community engagement in learning. The school in Arbourthorne has 69% of pupils entitled to pupil premium funding and serves one of the most disadvantaged wards in the country. Despite the odds stacked against it, Arbourthorne is recognised as a consistently good and highly successful school, going over and above to meet the needs of families it serves. An Even Better Arbourthorne's a current project which has secured successful engagement of community volunteers and entrepreneurs to help the school build on this philosophy. And this is one example of Arbourthorne being more than a school. Next, we have Nicola Noble, who is co-head at Surrey Square Primary School in London. She has worked at the school since 2006 and now works flexibly to juggle the role with being a mum to 3 children. Surrey Square has a clear mission: personal and academic excellence, everyone, every day. And this is underpinned by the understanding that well-being must be at the heart of everything for children, their families and the staff. This focus on well-being drove the school's response to the pandemic and continues to dictate the school's approach as they take COVID recovery seriously for the community. And the Old Kent Road Family Zone is a new initiative designed to grow out of the school's current practice and intends to use a unique bottom-up approach to create long-term lasting change for the community. And Nicola says this will ultimately change the map of inequality and indeed the monopoly board. And Nicola will ask you what you mean by that later on. And then we have Claudia Sess, who is 40 years old, an architect and mum of a 7-year-old boy who attends a school in Buenos Aires in which the Breathe Respirar programme is taking place. Breathe Respirar is a multidisciplinary action research programme that explores how green infrastructure and other nature-based solutions contribute to air quality, health, well-being, and provide opportunities to enjoy co-benefits such as connecting people and nature. The Breathe Respirar programme began its development in 2017 and is being implemented through a series of projects jointly undertaken by the universities of Sheffield and Buenos Aires in collaboration with schools, communities, and other organisations. So let's start now by turning to you, Vanessa, if that's okay. And I was wondering if you could start by telling us about your school and about Arbourthorne.
I certainly can. Thank you, Beth. So I'll give you a few facts about our school so that you get a sense of the background and what we're about. We're an inner city Sheffield school serving a truly brilliant community. As Beth mentioned, we've got 69% of the pupils that are entitled to free school meals, well above average, and there are high levels of deprivation. 40% of our learners, for example, have special educational needs. And we have about 18% of children who have English as an additional language. So that sets the context. Our 32,844 wards across the country were the 661st most deprived, but I'd argue one of the best schools in the country. We've got beautiful views. Our setting is absolutely incredible, actually. We've got beautiful views across the city, and we use that as part of our curriculum. And lots of green space in the environment. So it's not, you don't get a sense really of those high levels of deprivation when you drive into the community, because it's surrounded by a lot of beautiful space. We've got a high percentage of social housing and private rented accommodation. So that sort of sets the scene. I think when you visit the school, and anybody that comes goes away with a sense that it's somewhere really quite special. When you ask people to capture what they feel about the school, or visitors send a message, they will talk about the sense of warmth and community, high standards, high expectations around children's well-being, behaviour and involvement of families. You get a sense of it, but you have to come through the door really to be able to feel that. We've got a strong core of well-established colleagues within the school. So lots of colleagues have worked with me over that period of 14 years. And then we have new colleagues coming through who've grown and developed with the school. So they understand the context, and that plays a big part in the success of the school, I think. I would say we've got real pastoral excellence within the school, and a real sense of understanding who our families are and what their needs are, and of a two-way communication between home and school. So parents are very well respected here, and parents respect us, and that relationship is something that we build on every single day. We're all very open and honest in that relationship. We've got low levels of language on entry, so that actually shapes our curriculum. So in terms of what you see on the ground here, there are lots of innovative approaches to the curriculum, but they're actually, we believe that we need to shape what we do to meet the needs of our learners, not the other way around, that children don't come to school to have to conform in a particular way, that what we offer is a bespoke and tailored approach to individual children's needs as far as possible, and families' needs. So we have so some examples of that innovation are, we've got a life skills house on site. So we converted the caretaker's property into a place that we call Red Robin House, which is an utter joy, which has facilities for cooking. Children learn how to clean and cook. They learn how to grow vegetables from scratch. They learn how to cook, how to budget, how to mend a puncture on their tyre of their bike, how to phone emergency services, how to manage funds, and how to be innovative and entrepreneurial, really. So that's one of the extras that we offer. We teach French here and Latin, French through from early years through to Y6, and then Latin for our older learners to help underpin their understanding of language. which is really supportive, bearing in mind the starting points. We have an artist in residence who's again been with us here for 14 years. So her specific remit is around developing literacy through the arts. So to build on those low language levels on entry, and have children focused and interested in the arts and the wider world. And we use that to connect us internationally too. We've got a
Sorry, Vanessa, can you say a bit more about how you see the wider role of the school in Arbourthorne as well? There's clearly a lot going on, but there's a strong relationship between sort of indicators of place-based disadvantage and those educational outcomes you're talking about. So how do you see the role of the school in contributing to Arbourthorne as a place as a whole?
Well, I suppose in terms of what we do is we see that this is a collective responsibility that we have. So the open door policy and connecting within the community. So within Red Robin House, for example, we have a community space, and we have people coming in to use that facility. So connecting with other services around us. We have partnerships with other local schools. We have partnerships with the university. So, for example, we're working with Alison on a maker project at the moment. So we're developing parents and children's understanding of what we call tinkering, but developing technology and low and high tech solutions to problem solving, and developing maker mindsets with our families. And we're working with the Centre for Innovation and Voluntary Action, who are helping to fund the Better Arbourthorne project to make those connections into finding community-based solutions to problems or issues that families and community might have on a broader scale than just so beyond the educational remit to something that ripples out into the community but is based on what the community might need.
Could you say a bit more about an Even Better Arbourthorne then, what it's trying to achieve and how it works, and how does it sort of add value to what you were doing anyway within the school?
Well, it was established to address the root causes of poverty. So rather than just alleviate and respond to need, we developed something that would use the existing infrastructure of the school for greater community betterment. So we set up a project with the support of Michael Norton and SEVA, to support our ambition of becoming more than just a school. So we looked at finding sustainable initiatives within the school and within other community organisations that engage people. So some of the things that we've done or we continue to do with our families and our community is engage a group of volunteers to work in school. So we've expanded our volunteers. So we already had parents and we have parent volunteers, but what they've done now is they're learning to be the driver of their own change, really. So instead of us offering relief and help, they are becoming, they're pivotal in driving the change within their community. So, for example, they're running a really amazing community fridge, which serves a multitude of purposes, but is designed to redistribute surplus food back into the community. But it's run by our volunteers and run by our Better Arbourthorne coordinator and administrator. And that's an example of families coming together to seek out where the surplus food is and then redistribute it within the community. They also run something called Family Feasts. So pre-COVID, this was much more active, but they found innovative ways of doing this online. So they have community cooking groups. But what they were doing pre-COVID, and we've started to get back to, is cooking some of the surplus food or food that we've grown within our polytunnel and giving that back within the community. So the parents cook for each other and they take that food back home. Any surplus food is taken back home. So that sense of community and collaboration and looking at some of those skills that our community have that perhaps they weren't able to show off before. So their own entrepreneurial skills, their own leadership skills are now coming to the fore because they're leading on some of the initiatives. There are loads of things that you can see in the showcase, but for example, they run a slow cooker library and they deliver WhatsApp cooking groups online. So they're delivering that within family homes and sharing that collaboratively. So that also helps to support improvements in nutrition and health for our families, which is obviously a core of what we're about.
And that's what makes this really different, isn't it? It's the focus on the parents as volunteers and the community capacity building, rather than services being delivered to families in areas that are then labelled as disadvantaged.
That's right, and that's where Michael Norton and his expertise with the Centre for Innovation and Voluntary Action really came in, because he came to the school and could see something special, but could also see how we could work collaboratively with other organisations and with our parents to make that better. It's given us the opportunity to capitalise on the resilience of our families too, and actually their real desire to work together for the betterment of the community, to have a voice for and with the community. And strengthen the work of the women within the community too, who might not historically have had such a voice that they have now. And they've become quite political too, which is good. So they're standing up for their rights.
Well, let's come back onto that as well when we come into the conversation a bit further. I'm going to turn to Nicola for a bit now. Thank you very much, Vanessa. And just ask Nicola to tell us a bit about her school and the area it's located in. And then maybe as a London-based school, what distinctive challenges you've faced and how you've overcome them.
It's so funny, isn't it? Geographically so far apart, but very, very similar challenges. Nodding a lot there, Vanessa. Thank you for having me. So Surrey Square is situated on the Aylesbury Estate, which is in London. The Aylesbury Estate is one of the biggest social housing estates in Western Europe. So it's a huge estate, of which it's undergoing a massive 15-year regeneration project. And a lot of our families live within the blocks that haven't been touched yet, so they're living in quite challenging conditions. 98% of our families sit within the lowest bracket on the deprivation index. So a lot of our families face a lot of issue around their sort of basic needs. So 24% of our families live within temporary accommodation. 10% have no recourse to public funds that we know of. Yet despite all of those challenges that our families face, it's the most incredible community of which I feel very proud to be a part of. So the school has, as we said earlier, has a clear mission, which is personal and academic excellence, everyone, every day. And we have no rules at the school, which often leads people to have an intake of breath. Instead, we have 6 values that we live our life by, and we teach those values in the same way that we would academic subjects. So A, without judgment, and B, from a child's starting point. And we really prioritise that teaching within our curriculum. It's absolutely critical, because what we want children to do is to leave us with a real understanding of those values, being able to model those values and live those values and take other people on that journey with those values as well. And there's also something that we really expect both from our staff, a real buy-in to those values, and parents as well. We do a lot of work with staff and parents and children to really get a shared understanding of what those values mean to be a part of the Surrey Square community. So as a London-based school, I guess that, some of the challenges that we face are around housing. There's no housing for families, which can be very, very challenging. Poverty is a big issue. Community safety is increasingly a real issue for parents and their children. And of course, COVID exacerbated a lot of this. And what we saw was there was a real lack of understanding coming from central government around what vulnerability was and how vulnerability really increased throughout COVID, and now also what constitutes really a recovery as part of that process. So I guess what do we do? Again, we're really embedded within our families and within our community. The relationships that we have, we say that sort of the precondition to any meaningful work that we can do. So we really value and prioritise those relationships with our families. We tailor the education for the children. Again, Vanessa, it was making me smile earlier. We talk about education often being a round hole, and we're expecting children to neatly fit into that round hole. Whereas at Surrey Square, what we really see is that children come in all shapes and sizes, and so we have to mould the hole to fit the child. So really making sure that education is tailored to them and their needs, and making sure that their education is really engaging. So do a lot of work around project-based learning. So really making sure that the learning is engaging and purposeful and real and authentic for those children. And one of the things we've been doing more recently is training children as community activists. So really understanding, what does it mean to listen really carefully? What does it mean to really take action? And children all are involved in a community action project every year, so that when they leave us, they leave really knowing that they despite being little, one of our values is community, and we have a little character called Cole Community, and one of the things he says is that I may be small but I'm mighty. And I really believe that when our children leave us, they leave, yes, they're very, they're still young and they're small within the sort of world global community, but they really do leave us believing that they can take on the world, and that for us is absolutely critical.
You said you wanted sorry, go on.
No, go on.
I was going to say, you just mentioned this analogy of wanting to change the Monopoly board, and seeing as you're talking about change and the role of children as activists, I wanted to ask you a bit more what you mean by that.
So for anyone that's played Monopoly, London is depicted by different colours on the Monopoly board, and the Old Kent Road where we are based is the brown square, and in Monopoly the brown square generally is the square that nobody wants, and everybody sort of writes off because it's very cheap and irrelevant often, and I really see that this is almost like a weight that people carry around their neck of living where they live. People are judged because they come from the Old Kent Road, because they live on the Old Kent Road, and it's so wrong, because actually if you play Monopoly cannily, actually the Old Kent Road can be a really powerful tool within the game. And so for me, it's absolutely critical that we change that Monopoly board, we change the brown square, we show that actually our community is rich, our community has capacity, our community is something to be proud of, not something that should be sort of, I don't know, pushed in a corner or ignored. And I really see one of the things that we've worked on a lot is, what does it mean to really recover from COVID? And we work with a charity called Place to Be, which provides an in-school counselling service. And they really helped us understand the four main themes around recovery are self-efficacy, hope, gratitude, and connectedness. And what really struck me is that that's not just the recovery that's needed for our school or for our pupils, it's actually the recovery that's needed for our community. And self-efficacy being really critical in that people, we unlock the capacity and we show the skills and the knowledge and the lived experiences that people have that are so rich. And so that's the big mission really, is to change that board and show what an incredible place and what an incredible community it really is.
So what role can the school play then in changing that board? Do you recognise what Vanessa has said about the school being more an extension of the family rather than a delivery agent for government policies? And maybe I can ask you then to say a bit more also about the Old Kent Road Family Zone initiative that I mentioned in the introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we talk about a lot is that my analogy is often we put sticking plasters over things. So, we have a lot of families that suffer, food poverty. So we provide food bank vouchers for them, or, signpost them to different organisations. And something we started doing a number of years ago is realising actually what we need to do is provide that basic aid, of course, but also we need to remove that as an issue for those families. So how do we go about that? So we have a causes and campaign strategy that works alongside our sort of pastoral care for parents. So really looking at how do we engage at a sort of local, national level to help to take some of these things away as an issue. And so we've already committed to that work. And I guess for us, the zone is really looking at how do we drive that work further? How do we really impact within our community and make long-lasting change? So there's been a lot of investment in Southwark and in the Old Kent Road over the years, but we're still talking about the same issues. So what has happened previously hasn't worked because the same issues are there. So it's really important, I think, to look at how we do things and doing things differently to create that long-lasting change. So the idea with the zone is that we are exactly what you said, Vanessa. We're building capacity from within. It can't be. The other thing about our community is that it's done to a lot. Everybody thinks they know what's right for the Old Kent Road, and often that's people that don't live there, don't work there, don't understand the area. And actually, what if we turn that on its head? And what if we say, actually, the people that live here, the people that work here, the people that are invested in this area, they know what to do, and they will be the best people to think about what those solutions are and actually bring those solutions to life. So That's the work we're doing. We've undertaken a 4-month listening campaign to really understand from people what are the issues that people are facing, and then taking people through a process which you talked about earlier around understanding the root causes of those issues, and then starting to think about what could the solutions be, alongside mapping what's currently being offered in the area, where are organisations working, how can we join that work up, where are the gaps, what could we provide, and then how can we work with other service providers to be meeting the needs that we're seeing. So how do we see it changing? I mean, I really believe that if we do this in the right way and we build capacity from within, we don't tell the community what they should be doing, but we instead help them to make their voices heard, really genuinely heard, not just through a sort of a tokenistic consultation, that we will create long-lasting change for our community.
And that's a real shift in how we think about the role of schools in urban communities, in sort of co-producing that urban change with others, rather than just implementing state-based initiatives. I kind of want to bring you and Vanessa together for a short while now and just explore this a little bit more. There have been a lot of policies from successive governments to try and address place-based disadvantage and sort of working with schools in that way. You know, what do you think has worked from that, and what do we need to do differently now? So when you're talking about this more bottom-up, grounded, co-produced approach, how do we need to start taking that forward? What support do you need? Maybe Nicola first, and then I'll turn to you, Vanessa.
I think it's really understanding what that approach means. I think so often we talk about these things, or words are banded around, but we don't genuinely really understand what that means and what the conditions are that are needed to work in that way, and how we need to be as leaders, which often is different to perhaps how you previously have been. And I think that is absolutely critical, because I think otherwise there's all good intention, but without really understanding what that methodology is, then you ending up in working in the same way. I'll give you an example. So we're committed to this working, co-production, and been doing lots of reading about it and really sort of understanding what it means. And we did our first bit of work with parents around really understanding what the issues are. And then as a group of the sort of strategic team working with this, we started to unpick it and go, right, well, the root causes of that are this, this, and this. And at one moment, somebody who's working with us said, whoa, hold on a minute, we're doing the work. And it's so true. You naturally go into that way of working. So we took a step back, went back to the parents and helped them to go through the process of what are the root causes, and then start to think about the solutions. So I think it is really consciously working in a different way and really understanding what that way is, which is absolutely critical to this working, and it being genuine.
I mean, Vanessa, you've said to me before that being, or at least I fed back to you, that I think being a brave, innovative head, actually to use the tools at your discretion is one of the key things, actually. Do you want to just reflect on what's worked and what hasn't, and how important are these different forms of leadership? In some ways leading from behind, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'll try not to get too political. Obviously, working in this field for so long, I think I've seen some things come and go. Some of the projects that have worked best, or some of the approaches that have worked best, for me, go back to the approach where the early years of Tony Blair, really, in education, and that focus on communities, early years, and sustained funding, and looking at the wider agenda over time for people within communities, and allowing schools and community groups to make decisions. As Nicola talked about, they were able to use their voice to shape what the future would look like, and some of those are the most successful. So, for example, we were part of an education action zone. There was Excellence in Cities money, and we've sustained as a group of heads some of those most powerful initiatives that we developed when we were deputies and heads in previous years within our communities. And some of those are the ones that have been successful because they've had longevity. They've been about building relationships. They've been about innovation within communities. They've been about the communities driving the change. They're long-standing. And I think Sheffield South East partnership that I'm part of is a really strong community of people who have taken those the funding that was there at that time and sustained it with a lot less funding, but the same levels of innovation over time. So some of those to me are the better initiatives that have worked.
And before we move to Claudia, perhaps we can just focus a little bit on how the COVID pandemic has sort of changed these relationships between school, families and communities and the roles you've played, because in some ways the pandemic has thrown into the spotlight how schools are frontline services, and there's a long debate about whether schools should be plugging the gaps left behind by decades of underinvestment or failed and abandoned government schemes. What's your take on that? You know, what has the impact of COVID been, and is it your role to be a community hub or provider of social services?
I think we are, and I think there's so much. You can either spend the energy moaning about it and berating it, or you just crack on. And I think there is an element of you need to crack on and provide what families need. And I think what I see that's happening both at Surrey Square and at Arbourthorne is that we're also looking at how do you sustain working in this way, and how do you build capacity so that the community then is able to be providing that sort of resilience and that resource that is needed. So I think there's a danger that we can get caught up in we shouldn't have to do this, but actually we do have to. And our children, to enable them to access the education that we're putting in front of them, their basic needs need to be met. They need to be living within safe environments where they feel safe, and as I said, their basic needs are met. So there's no point us putting all our energies into this incredible education if they're not in a mind space or in a physical space to be able to do that. And I think that was really evident through COVID. The government, again, not getting political, but the government talked a lot about what's your online learning offer. Children should be online for this number of hours. Well, if you live in one room, if you don't have access to the internet, if you don't have a device, if you're hungry, if all those things, it doesn't matter what the online offer is. Actually, you need to make sure that children have all those other needs met before you're worrying about what their online learning offer is. And then, in fact, actually, what you also need to be doing is making sure that what your learning offer is for them doesn't then lead to an increase in the sort of the gap between those that do have and those that don't, which is the danger through COVID, is that those children that lived within families where they had multiple devices, unlimited data, worries about food or whatever, were already perhaps at an advantage, and what you don't want to happen is for that advantage to grow.
Beth, could I just build briefly on what Nicola said?
Yeah, please do, Vanessa.
Beth, Nicola, when you talk about basic needs being met, I think that we should also start to look in society about whether basic needs for families and communities needs to include the internet. And I would argue it does. Access to technology was so vital for us. We made sure that every child had a device and had access to a device. I was shocked at how many families didn't have an email address and how much doorstep teaching we had to do. But what I'm elated in terms of the outcome of COVID is that our children no longer have their learning sandwiched into 7 hours a day. They've all got a device that they take home between home and school, a Chromebook, so that every family's child can extend their learning time into the evenings. They've practically doubled the amount of learning time that they're doing. So for us, in terms of narrowing the gap, it's been an absolute bonus, has COVID in that regard, that we've managed to get technology. Sheffield had a brilliant programme of reconditioning laptops and getting those out to school, so that we've been able to give those devices away and use Google Classroom and that platform to get directly into the homes. That was something that we couldn't do before. We didn't have, we couldn't divert all our funds into doing that. But where there was a will, there was a way, and we had lots of doorstep colleagues going out and teaching and training families, and so that every child had a device. And I'm really proud of that. But I would say that that's also in the future, if we're to reduce the divide across the world, we have to reduce the digital divide. It is absolutely vital to giving people access to the wider world.
And Nicola,
the irony is you couldn't even book a COVID test without having access to the internet. I mean, that's the irony of it. And we had people sat outside the school trying to connect to our Wi-Fi, to be able to do simple things like that. I mean, I think the other thing I would add to that in terms of basic need is around mental health. And, again, I think there's such a lack of emphasis on mental health sort of universal provision for children particularly, and really thinking about, I keep banging on about it, but this concept of recovery. And it's like, if we really focus on what recovery means and do that in a really, I guess, serious, genuine way, we are then going to not see the impact of the pandemic in 5, 10, 15 years time on our mental health system. But if we just plow on without really thinking about that and taking that seriously, I do really worry about what we're going to see, you know, as our children get older after experiencing this kind of trauma that they've experienced.
And of course, I mean, you've both spoken very powerfully about the need for schools to meet these basic needs as a precondition to any educational attainment. But obviously there are tensions there between that wider catalytic role of schools and how you're actually judged by Ofsted. And I imagine that must be quite a balancing job within your own schools. We'll come back to that maybe later, but I'm going to turn to Claudia now with a bit of a shift towards more of an environmental slant in terms of the roles of schools. Claudia is joining us from Buenos Aires. Thank you very much. Could you start by telling us about your school and the area of Buenos Aires it's located in?
Well, I will tell you that the school where we are working is called school number 22, and it's situated in Buenos Aires, Argentina, in Belgrano. It's a neighborhood that it has a lot of mixtures with density, population, traffic. It's a kind of mixture in the whole neighborhood, and the school particularly situated in a place where two avenues are in the intersection of two avenues, where the traffic is a real matter about the contamination and the noise and the surround that is near the school and the country yard of the school. I don't know how to say, but it's a school that it has about 300 families that attend there, and it's as I said before, it's a school that has a full-time, and it's a public school. So there are a few similarities about what they just said before about the lack of internet, of devices, of it's very unequal, the population that goes to the school. Mm-hmm. So the school also has the I don't know, the school acts as a family, as a community, as a whole thing, not only for the things that they learn to our children, you know, it has more to be with the whole environment. Mm. I don't know if I can explain
it well. And I think what your project adds to the discussion today is that it introduced these inequalities around the urban environment, and particularly around air quality and emissions and pollution. And you're involved with a project called Breathe, Respirar, to build green fences, with Miguel Canai, who's here from the geography department. Can you say something about what a green fence is and what the Breathe, Respirar project is about?
Do you want Miguel to explain that, or me?
It's up to you if you'd like to, or we can bring in Miguel.
That's okay. I think Miguel can explain it better, but I can do it.
No, you go
ahead. Go ahead, Claudia. It's probably better if we first hear it from you and then I comment.
Okay. Well, I'm being part of this project for about a year. I joined them for a short time, but it's a project that began in 2017 and I tell back. And it's a project that explores how green fences can contribute to air quality and health and can give the solution to contribute to air quality. I say in the project try to evaluate how effective could be the forming green barriers to improve the air quality, and they have three more important things to take part of the project. Mitigate the pollution is the first one, but it also tries to evaluate the different plans to improve the physical and the psychological effects that causes in health of students and teachers and the community itself. And the other pillar that is for me at least very important is to raise awareness about the problem and the possible solution of the contamination.
Do you want to elaborate at all, Miguel?
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite, Beth. It was really interesting to hear about the schools here in Sheffield. I live less than a mile away from the Arborthorne Primary School along Park Range Road. So it's good to learn about my neighborhood as well and to learn about the London school. And as Claudia was saying, the case in the school in Buenos Aires is there are some shared issues, but it's also a very different situation internationally, and also for what the Claudia School is located in the city. And the main concern is that it is a school directly exposed to traffic-related air pollution. And it's also a school that it was built in the 1980s with very little green in it, almost no green in it, no vegetation. So it's bricks and iron plates. The school, it is city run and it provides basic education services. And the question is, how can this school be transformed so it also provide environmental services and also environmental education and awareness services? Because air pollution is a relatively poorly understood issue in Buenos Aires for multiple issues that it'll be a little bit long to explain now. Okay. But doesn't mean there's no air pollution, it's just not well understood.
And Claudia, maybe to come back to you, what's your role? We've talked a bit with Vanessa and Nicola about parents playing key roles in these schools initiative. You are a parent, aren't you? You're not a head teacher or a member of staff like our other members of the panel.
I'm a mix of some things. I'm parent of a boy that attends that school. I'm an architect that involves in the project, and I'm working as a nexus between the school and the project. So I'm a sort of link between community, school, and the program. So I take part of the three. I take part of the three teams, but I'm really. It's a quite difficult to explain. But I'm a mom. I'm a concerned of the contamination, and I want my son to have a more beautiful and more healthier school. Mm-hmm. I'm architect, and I'm trying to make my best to install the fence in that school, and I'm part of the school working as there's in public schools in my country there are a cooperadora. It's a sort of
it's a Parents Teachers Association.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you. So,
Claudia, how has the project brought the school and the community together? Have there been challenges you faced?
That's now we are trying to install the measurements instruments to put in the school so we can build the fence. But the school itself, the parents that we attend there were very concerned about the contamination. So some parents put in contact with the program and offered the school as a part of the investigation. So the community and the program and the school are working together in order to realize the project itself.
And is that unusual in Buenos Aires? Are there other schools that you know of that are experimenting with these partnerships between parents and the community and the school to address environmental impacts?
Maybe I can answer this one. It is quite rare, particularly for city-run schools. City-run schools tend to be run by city government, which is a huge institution, huge agency, rather bureaucratic, if I may say, and where the involvement of parents is relatively kept on the side at this kind of associations that Claudia mentioned. But more than that, when it comes to refurbishing buildings, when it comes to adding layers of infrastructure and services, it becomes quite complicated to experiment. And I think it's one of the challenges, and I think it's one of the aspects where our project could make a real impact in transforming this relation and helping schools becoming more open to what parents and the rest of the community may have to bring in to help the schools adapt, to make them more environmentally friendly and also more people friendly.
And maybe to both of you, I asked the same question to Vanessa and Nicola. How's your project been impacted by COVID? I've seen Miguel, whether you were here, this must be quite a challenging issue to continue with those levels of parent, community, school interaction. Has it stalled the project?
Not as badly as it could have been, because the local team in Buenos Aires has been absolutely fantastic. The researcher, we have a project manager who's a landscape architect, Veronica Fabio, who's been absolutely phenomenal and keeping the project running. And then we have highly involved people like Claudia today, who really have kept things running. And we've been working like this, actually, remotely and through video conferences. So it has been impacted. During the time Argentina itself was impacted, when schools were closed, they were closed for a very long time. But other than that, once they reopened, we could start working in collaboration through technology. So that's my impression. Maybe we were discussing in our last meeting actually how some of the timing of delays are experienced quite differently. We're, it's an interdisciplinary project with people who work in design, social scientists like me, but also air quality scientists. And some of the implementation times are felt very differently by the different project members, and particularly the school community and the parents. So,
so you mean that they expected the green fences to be up and running much quicker than they were?
We hope so.
In a way, yes.
So, I mean, on that, if someone else wanted to do this project, maybe in one of the schools in Surrey Square or in Arbourthorne Community Primary School, has what you've learned, is that transferable to these contexts? What would your advice be, and how might that be implemented here?
Actually, this is an interesting question, Beth, because this is a model that has been implemented now in several UK schools, including one school in Sheffield. I'm blanking now where the school in Sheffield is, but Ecclesfield Road, Hunter's Bar. And it was a very specific model with a lot of parent involvement and actually quite a lot of resources and university collaboration as well. And what we're doing in Buenos Aires is trying to see how that model can be broadened. And I think that broadening needs to be thought about multiple dimensions, not just the international geographical dimension, but also dimensions of different local conditions at the schools, and how this green agenda and concerns with air quality can also be pursued in schools which may have other concerns to those of Hunter's Bar and the schools in Buenos Aires. Actually, in the schools in Buenos Aires, we're working with 3 schools, and they have very different social economic profiles. And part of the research is trying to understand how this model can be generalized.
And Claudia, do you want to add anything before we move back to Vanessa and Nicola in terms of what you've learned from this project, or what you'd hope for it in the future?
No, I think that this project is now being getting through a lot of difficulties that have to be with governments and permissions and installations, and that's the management statement. So when the fence could be installed, I think it would be the point that we are all expecting. I think that all the work we are doing through the pandemic and COVID, and the time that it's getting longer than we wanted to, it worth the effort. But the project itself is something that would improve the health and the building and the society and the community. So everything that could happen before the fences is installed would be well, or would be benefit, and could be a benefit for all the community, not only for the children that attend the schools, you for all the community that go in that corner.
Thank you, both of you. I'm going to turn back to Vanessa and Nicola now and ask to pick up this question around climate change, carbon reduction and environmental change, obviously with the COP26 happening in Glasgow. Can you share what your schools are doing around this area, and whether you think, this green fences project, the idea of building green fences, would that work here, and how do you think that would come about? Vanessa?
Yeah, sure. I can make a start. Much of the work that we do is as part of Better Arbourthorne project, so developing our growing facilities and capacity with we're young tree champions now, and we work with Sarah Lom and the Tree Council to develop our number of trees that we've got on site. We're very lucky, aren't we, in Sheffield? A third of Sheffield is in the Peak District, 60% green spaces. Has it just been awarded the greenest city? We're really lucky in the setting that we've got, but we still think it's really important that children, again, are the drivers of their own change. So children being tree champions and being engaged in the tree champions has been really powerful for us in terms of connecting children with nature. We've got a connected curriculum, which is really important to us. So some of the basics that we put in place are children recognising their role within the environment, recognising tree species, animal species, endangered species. Every class adopts their own animal and plays their part in understanding that. We have forest schools and an outdoor classroom as well, because of part of our Better Arbourthorne project. And as a school, we're looking at installing electric points for cars in the car park. So we're trying to think ahead. So we're chipping away in our own way. I love the idea of the green fences. I think it sounds really exciting what Claudia and Miguel are achieving there. And in fact, in terms of the community saying that this is what they want, part of our environmental work has been about parents saying they want. We've got a huge polytunnel on site, and they're growing lots of produce now to distribute to the community. And that was because that's what they wanted to do. And that's been, as Nicola talked about, being important in developing mental health and well-being.
You're getting a real ecology going there, aren't you, between the polytunnel and the community fridge and the family feast? Nicola?
Yeah, so it's really interesting what you're saying there, Vanessa, because one of the things that's really coming up through our listening with parents in the local community are concerns around the environment and lack of access to green spaces, but also the amount of pollution. The Old Kent Road, for anyone that's ever been there, is such a busy road, and we've got rising cases of children with asthma and et cetera, which of course is all linked. So one of the things that we've been doing is really thinking about how do we address this through our curriculum. As I said earlier, our children are trained to be community activists who work with Citizens UK, so they really understand how to take on that role. And we have a community focused project every year, and this year 2 of the year groups actually really focused on climate change and really having a think about what can they actually really do within the local area to make a difference with that, which I think is absolutely critical. I think one of the other things that we talk about a lot is how to make this issue of climate change really accessible to children and families, to really understand, I guess, how serious this issue is, and I think it's really important for us as educators to put this on our curriculum, to have a curriculum that really is based not just on learning about about the past, but really thinking about the future and what we can be doing now to really impact the future. So we're taking that really seriously and working with local organisations similarly to really help educate our children on this. So one organisation is called Edible Avondale, and they've actually installed a polytunnel for us at school, which is fantastic, and they run clubs every evening, so children are really able to partake in that, but also we're able to build that into the curriculum learning as well. And really engaging with other local organisations. We're lucky to have a park directly opposite the school, so really working with them to sort of think about how we can really protect that park and also really utilise, because so many of our children live within flats or live within cramped spaces. They don't have access to outdoor space, and that was particularly an issue during COVID, and I think that's something that's really sticking with people. We're also, as I said, going through a regeneration locally, so also working with local developers to really make sure that people's voices are heard, that they want more green space, they want more opportunities to be outside. And I absolutely love the idea of the green fences, because I think, yes, people can be outside more, but we need to really think about the air that they're being exposed to when they're out there. So I think that's really, really powerful, and yeah, something I'd love to talk to you more about, Claudia, and understand more.
So I mean, I think we've heard a lot from all of you. We've covered a lot of ground about the role of schools as extensions of family, rather than just sites where government policies get implemented. We've talked about the role of schools in co-producing more bottom-up change with parents and families. We've talked about children as activists and families as environmental activists, and we've talked about sort of the gamut of potential roles, from reducing poverty to addressing climate change. This is quite a lot for schools to handle on their own, particularly after the years of policies that we've had. What would be your sort of single big thing that could change, or that you would need to be able to continue to do this work? And I'll just give you an opportunity to respond to that before we move on to questions.
I mean, there has to be an understanding that this is the work, and I think when I say an understanding, that has to come from central government, that actually this is the work, and this is the work that schools are undertaking and taking really seriously. So yes, schools are judged on their academic outcomes, of course they are, and we want that. We want to make sure that our children achieve as highly as possible, and we have to understand that for so many of our children and our families, what they're experiencing means that is really challenging for them. And so the work that schools need to do to be able to level that playing field is absolutely critical. So I think it's an understanding of that, it's space to do that, it's funding to do that, and it's a real, I guess, it's an understanding of how you do that, and really being able to support people in that process that's going to be really critical.
Vanessa?
I Sorry, I'd echo what Nicola's saying there as well. I suppose a recognition of the wider outcomes and the wider narrative that surrounds educating a child. And the new Ofsted framework is not that new, but it hasn't really been around and implemented because of COVID. But that gives us an opportunity to add this to our narrative about what educating a child is and what's important for our communities. It's that wider picture for us. So acknowledging from starting points as well, certainly for me, for looking at what children actually need and being given the permission to develop everything that the child needs in terms of being a future global citizen, and not just be narrowed to specific data outcomes. Let's measure the whole child, which we do here, and we've always been successful in that wider narrative around children's engagement, mental health and well-being, as well as a measure of success within our schools and communities.
And what's really interesting on that is that so many employers now are not really interested in academic outcomes as part of their recruitment process. They're interested in personal attributes. They're interested in how people can, articulate themselves, how they build relationships with people. And I think that's going to be really interesting as we move forward as well, as the, industry is actually moving forward and looking at recruiting in a different way, and jobs are changing, and the education sector is going to need to respond to that, because, for us, something like oracy is really critical to what we do at the school, and we teach that as a skill, knowing that that's something that's absolutely a critical life skill that children need when they go to secondary school and beyond. And so I think we have to be, often as an education system, we're slow to respond, and actually we need to make sure that we are on the front foot and being proactive rather than reactive.
And Claudia, Miguel, would you like to make a sort of final comment before we open up to questions in the chat?
Claudia, do you want to go ahead, or do you want me to go ahead?
I want you to go ahead.
Okay, sure, no problem. No, I mean, this has been really enlightening to listening to everybody, including Claudia, with whom we've discussed some things. But it's interesting how sometimes in this fora you hear new perspectives as well. Yeah, definitely look forward to hearing the inputs from the rest of the attendees.
Thank you, and thank you all for your really interesting and thought-provoking responses to the questions. I feel we tried to cover quite a lot, and we could have gone into a lot of depth over more things, but hopefully we can continue the conversation afterwards. We already have a couple of questions that have come in. Please do post any other questions in the Q&A if you want to. So the first one is from Jonathan, who says, with families becoming more aware of mental health issues for themselves and their children, and concerns over how difficult it is for families to access those kinds of health plans, the question is around whether there's a role for universities and schools within these deprived communities to solve some of these wicked problems. So I think that there's a specific question there over the role of universities and schools within communities to address those problems. Vanessa, maybe I'll come to you first. Alison, I might ask you to come in then and talk a little bit about the Maker project, and then we'll come to Nicola, Claudia and Miguel.
I think that I was just going to quickly build on what Nicola said about, it's interesting, isn't it, both our schools don't have rules, they have core values. And again, I think that needs to be considered as part of this, because I think that again connects with Jonathan's question around mental health and well-being, and what we value within people and what we try to grow within people, and what we see as success. Within our schools, we have mental health champions, and we're working in partnership to become trauma-informed schools across Sheffield, for example. So all those strategies are to build into reducing waiting times within child and adult mental health services. We understand that there's a massive pressure there at the moment. So we're actually upskilling core teams and making sure that everyone's aware of picking up those early indicators, and also some of those more challenging aspects of mental health and well-being, so that we can signpost people to the services. But some of that is being picked up from within our school communities.
And Vanessa, sorry, what about the role of universities and schools in partnership within these areas?
Sorry. Well, I suppose if you look at the work that we're doing with Alison, and so developing the technological side of the work that we're doing, and utilising colleagues that have got that level of expertise to support where our children are going in the future, it's certainly something that is potentially underdeveloped. We've engaged in lots of projects, nothing on this scale that we have with Alison, which is a year-long action research project. But there's certainly a role for schools to say what they need, which is what we've done with Beth, for example, and her department, say what we're looking for, and then they respond to our levels of need based on what's pertinent to us, really. So that's how we've connected with the university. So academics have helped to support different aspects that we've been wanting to develop, with action research being a really good example of that, and making sure that we do that properly.
Alison, do you want to come in there and say a little bit about the Maker School project?
Yes, I will. It's brilliant to be here, and I mean, I've just been blown away by listening to all the talks and all of the amazing stuff's going on. I'm in a really privileged position to be working really closely with Vanessa and her team at Arbourthorne. I'm based in the School of Education, and I lead on a project called Maker Futures, and this is about developing maker education and maker spaces, particularly around kind of primary education. And so this links into the sustainability and the communities work through really helping children to understand how things are made, how things are put together, how they can start to tinker and make things for themselves or to mend things, rather than being caught up in this real kind of consumer society where we're constantly throwing things away. So getting back to those old traditional kind of make, do and mend things, but also fusing that with 21st century kind of skills, the new technologies in there as well. And really focusing on the mindsets that children develop through making, and some of these mindsets that I heard Nicola mention about earlier, and the importance of these, and making sure our children are, understand how to problem find and problem solve and work in collaboration with each other. And these skills, these mindsets are not just important for, for people who want to become the next kind of, rocket scientist or robot engineers. These are massively transferable skills across all areas of future employment and education and things. So they're really important for all of our children. And I think there is an important relationship between universities and schools. And it is really important that that relationship is able to develop. And it's not just academics having, kind of placing a project into a school. It's really important, and this is what we're doing with Arbourthorne, is that this is done together and we're building a project. It's really important that we have teacher and child voice in the development of the work that we're doing, and that's what this project is about. And so Maker Futures is a big wide programme, and the work we're doing at Arbourthorne is a kind of a project within that, but we're developing a maker curriculum that works in schools for children, and that it can also bridge that gap into the community as well, and into families, and so there's lots of work being done in that. The relationships are really important to have.
Maybe I'll add to that a bit as well before I hand over to others. When I first started working with Vanessa in Arbourthorne Community Primary School, I then became aware that Vanessa was also working with medics and medical students from the medical school. She's also working with architecture students through a programme called Live Works to build the Healthy Hideout or other kinds of things. She's also working with Alison on the Maker Futures curriculum. But I had to find that out through Vanessa. I didn't already know that. So we place a burden on our partners to coordinate for us. And I don't think that's a very sustainable position for a university to be in. Universities look like they're big organisations, but they're not actually homogenous, and we often work in silos. And so one of the things I'd like to do over the next year is think about what a more organised relationship our side would look like, so that we can better support a school like Arbourthorne and its community. So we've been making connections already with people in another research institute at the university called HELSI, which is Healthy Lifespans, and they're looking at sort of nutrition and aging, and we've been making connections with people in the Food Institute to look at nutrition, and there's people in the Faculty of Science who are interested in mobile planetariums. So how can we really make ourselves easy to work with, to be responsive to the needs of a community like Arbourthorne?
And I think as well, it's really important that schools are able to tap into that, because there's quite often, you know, it's great for Arbourthorne to be able to tap into this work going on, and I quite often hear of other schools that want to do it as well, and they are connected with us but not necessarily other people in the universities. So I think also opening up those opportunities to other schools as well would be really helpful.
I wonder whether, just building on that, Alison, sometimes that's about brave leadership and innovation as well, isn't it? And I should imagine that Nicola and her colleagues are chasing lots of or a number of projects which suit their needs at the time. And I think the thing that I think I do particularly well, and my colleagues and my governors do well, is seek out solutions to our problems. We don't wait for things to come to us, and that again that's a message for schools too, and that could be the culture in which we work within our group of heads, is that we go seeking solutions to our issues. And if that means working with partners in industry, we find those partners. We don't wait.
Nicola, so on the same question, and we do have another one waiting for us in the chat, do you also work with universities in London? Is that something that you see as part of your mix potentially?
Not as much as we could do, and I think what's interesting is exactly what you said there, which is we do where we sort of seek it out, but I think there's also something about really understanding. Universities and schools are very different entities, I guess, and it's also a sort of a mutual understanding of what each other can offer. I'm actually meeting with one of our universities tomorrow, and that's a bit of an exploration around, this is what we're doing, how would you like to get involved, what could you offer, because I think so often we don't have enough of those conversations. We sort of, as you said, Vanessa, we expect people to come to us, or we go with perhaps a specific need. Do we ever spend enough time, is there ever enough time to sort of really have a conversation around, this is what we're doing, how might we collaborate on that? So I think that's a really interesting point. And I think also it's knowing how to get into places. I think for people, sometimes places can seem big and you need to sort of find your inroads. So I think, again, it is about having that time and really valuing building those relationships, because it's those relationships that you build and you nurture over time, and then you're not really sure where they're going at the beginning, but actually then you sort of find your way as you go through. So it's really valuing that process as well, I think.
And before we move on to the next question, Miguel, Claudia, do you want to reflect at all on this point around universities and schools addressing wicked issues in communities?
I think from our experience in the Breathe Respire project, when we start co-production with schools, we're realizing that we cannot engage with the issue of green fences as a single issue collaboration. Once the partnership and co-production begins, we have faced other demands from the schools, from the different schools, and other needs, which somehow we are trying to respond to, maybe find the person who can address those needs within both the University of Sheffield and University of Buenos Aires if we cannot do it, but it would be a very narrow frame collaboration just to focus on defense. Because school, as we can hear, we've been hearing today, schools are worlds on their own. So the issues are interconnected and they cannot be addressed piecemeal. So that's one lesson we've learned. About the specific issue about mental health, we have not been directly engaging with mental health, but we've been engaging with well-being and the role that vegetation can play in well-being, and how it can be a base for different kinds of programs that curate that interaction between people and greenery, vegetation in urban settings, that can make contributions towards their well-being and possibly their mental health.
Thank you, Miguel. I remember you mentioning to me the notion of an urban oasis as one of the future visions that you'd like to see within schools.
Yes, it's actually one model, because again, it's not just vegetation alone, it's vegetation as a nature-based solution that improves environmental conditions and can be used to promote biodiversity gains at local settings. Bring in different kinds of insects, butterflies, and other aspects of urban nature that can help, that can contribute to people's well-being and actually a sense of community.
So we spent a while on that question. I'm going to move us on because there are a couple of others in the chat. I think this one is mainly to Vanessa and Nicola, possibly also Alison, you might have something to add to this. The question is, what do you see as crucial to addressing shortages in teachers in the UK, particularly STEM teachers? Do you believe the financial incentives promoted by the Department for Education will be effective? So this is a UK-centred question. Nicola, maybe I'll ask you first.
I think one issue is that a lot of noise in the media is about, or on social media and things, is about, is negative about teaching. And I think we need to get more positive stories out there about what an incredible profession this is, and, you know, the opportunities that are within it, because actually, yeah, I do think it gets a bad reputation. And I think the sort of the negative voices out, what's the word, shout the positive ones. So I think there's something in that. I think there's really something about teacher training and really investing in that, and support for teachers. You know, teaching is a challenging profession, and yes, we do get 13 weeks holiday a year, but my goodness, teachers need that. So I do think there's really something to address around burnout, and around, you know, what, how we're supporting our teachers, and particularly when they're working within very, very challenging communities. You know, their well-being is absolutely critical, and that comes, you know, right from the centre in terms of, you know, if pressure is being put on head teachers, and then that's, you know, head teachers aren't getting the right support, then that you know, that filters down. So I think that's absolutely critical as well. And I think the sort of understanding the development opportunities and how schools are changing and evolving makes sort of what was potentially seen as more of a sort of traditional profession. Perhaps when people really understand that, they can see the wealth of opportunities that are available within the profession as well. I think that's also really important.
Vanessa, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple of bits. I think we need to measure what we value too. Sometimes schools are measured on you see people leave the profession because they're measured on very narrow set of measures, and we need to start measuring what we value within our schools, and that needs that knowledge, and I think wider in education. I think flexible working for people, you know, Nicola is a co-head, and I think that's a really exciting model, more opportunities for that. But also, you know, our recruitment and retention strategy here works really well at Arbourthorne. We do accommodate people working part-time and doing other things away from school too, and that brings benefits. So for example, having an artist in residence who's teaching on the ground part of the week, but also establishing her own portfolio and her own career, and her doing a master's and a PhD alongside that, is a way of bringing in, if we want to develop STEM in schools, it's not just about dangling a carrot for newly qualified, or for people that have just have read physics to come in and be given some sort of bonus, monetary bonus. It's got to be more than that. You've got to want to really value that subject, and perhaps offer the opportunity for people to study alongside working in schools. Flexible working for me would be key to recruiting some of the best people into the profession, but also people that want to come here because they want to do it, not because of how much you paid, that's irrelevant, not because of the holidays, but because they've got a passion to be working with children, with people, with students, with families. It's I think you have to be careful who you recruit into the profession. And I think if you acknowledged and valued the people that are working on the ground in schools, and the challenges that they meet, particularly inner city schools, for example, I think we'd have a better recruitment and retention strategy.
Can I just link that back? Sorry, Alison, before we come to you, can I just link it back to the discussion that we had earlier today about this sort of wider role of schools within their communities? Because that implies surely some kind of different job description for what a teacher in a school does, and they're already under all of this pressure. You know, I mean, maybe specifically, Vanessa, you know, how have your staff reacted to an Even Better Arbourthorne? Have they seen it as part of their role to get involved in these wider things? Do you think that reframing the role of the school in the community makes it more or less attractive to people coming into the profession?
A very few people that leave Arbourthorne, which is interesting. So again, in terms of recruitment and retention, that wider narrative and that wider involvement keeps us at the cutting edge. It makes people excited to be here because they see the impact on families and they see the impact on the children and community that they're serving, and how powerful that is in helping us achieve our ambition of making people really citizens that are beyond a narrow and prescriptive curriculum, that are able to offer the world more. So I have high numbers of people who have worked here for a number of years, and I do attribute that to always being involved in different initiatives and giving us the opportunity to have a wider narrative as a school.
And Nicola, do you just want to respond to that? And then Alison, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's, our retention is high as well. And I think, people genuinely love being part of the school and being part of something bigger, and really thinking about how we're really seeing the impact that they're having on children and families and belonging to something. I think that's the thing. The community, they're part of that community and they're valued. And I think, again, if we flip that back to, our teachers valued as a profession generally, I'm not sure in a sense, in the way that they should be. Teachers do the most incredible job, and they are committed, dedicated professionals that are constantly seeking the best for a wide group, wide ranging group of children, and they do that often for long hours, with all good intention, with real love behind that. And I think that often really doesn't get acknowledged as much as it should do.
And Alison, do you want to come in on that question as well? And then I think we've got time for one last quick question before we wrap up for the day.
Yeah, I really just wanted to touch on the STEM element within that question and how that relates. And, the work that I'm building on for Maker Futures is, very STEM related, really, in the materials and robotics and all of those kind of areas. But this is particularly kind of at primary level, and we need to be really careful that we're not asking suddenly another thing of primary teachers saying, well, you also need to be experts in 3D printing and electronics and all these different areas. And actually, what we the way that we're designing that program is to saying to teachers, actually, you don't have to be the experts. We can learn together with the children, and what you need to do is to take that role of facilitator, because we want to develop those skills in the problem finding and solving, and the learning how to tackle those problems and tweak them and tinker them. And you're never going to get that just by following a set of instructions from an expert teacher. That you need a little bit of that skill building, but actually you just need you need that enthusiasm from the teachers, and you need the opportunity to be able to do that learning yourself. And so it's a different approach, but hopefully it's one where we can encourage all the teachers in the school to have the confidence to tackle that kind of the STEM-based education, rather than just having those kind of a few specialist expert teachers. So it's a bit of a different way of looking at that.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Alison. We're nearly up against time. I'm just going to ask one more question to Vanessa, Nicola, and Claudia. And it's about other kinds of partnerships really that need to be mobilized to support these wider roles that schools can play in poverty reduction or community making or environmental change. So the question from Joy is around, what about other kinds of community groups? For instance, the Wildlife Trust. That's just an example, but sitting behind that is the idea that it's not just about the school in the community, but how you bring community into school. Nicola, maybe I'll start with you, and then Claudia and Miguel, if you want to respond, and then we'll end with you, Vanessa, and then we'll wrap up for the day. Just shortly though, if that's okay, Nicola, because we're quite out of time. Yeah,
it's absolutely critical. The phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a village to run a school. And I think it's really important that we, involve our community, engage with our community, open up to our community, and build those relationships to ensure that then we're able to provide for our children, enrich the education for our children, and it's all out there. It's about going out and finding it and giving people permission often to get involved.
Thank you, Nicola. Claudia, Miguel, final comment from you on that?
I don't know how to say it properly, but I think that perhaps what you do in your house, in your home with your child as a family, it has to be with a community and the school, and it's all the same. You gave the ¿cómo se dice ejemplo? You watch your children what you want them to watch. So if you get involved in a project or in a school or in the community, they would learn the essential things that it isn't important what teachers teach specifically, but I think that there are a lot of values that you can transmit being part of the family, but part of the community or part of the school.
That's beautifully said. Thank you very much. Vanessa.
Real
Miguel,
quick. Yeah, for the green fences, when we built the green fences, it was a multi-partner effort. We had volunteers from horticulturalist societies, university students, from different institutions. We had different city government units, and we also have different environmental NGOs. And the overall aim is to create a value chain to support the expansion of the model, from growing the plants that are most effective in addressing air pollution, to securing the people who will install them and who will be there to make sure the fences are well maintained and well kept over time.
Thank you, Miguel. Vanessa, I'm going to give the near to last word to you.
I don't think I've got an awful lot more to add, to be honest, Beth, but I think any partnership and any connection with community groups and will, as everybody else has already said, will help to grow a better future for all of us. So as many connections as you can possibly make for the good of everybody around us. So if anybody wants to get in touch, then I'm happy to join something else too. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. We haven't had time for a few questions. I'll just give you a flavour of them. Jonathan was asking about single points of contact within the university instead of getting lost down rabbit holes of different departments. Completely true. Jenna has reflected on the brilliant work around the artist in residence and wants to know about whether the air work has been analysed and evaluated. So maybe we can follow up on that. And Dave's asking or questioning whether, because the Chief Inspector at Ofsted has recently said that schools should not seek to be a social panacea but focus on education, and suggesting this is quite a worrying statement for schools in deprived areas. And then finally, we have a comment from Glynis talking about getting parents and children involved in litter picks and food poverty groups. So there's lots of ideas. I really want to thank the audience and for all of their great questions and comments. I want to thank co-organisers Miguel and Alison, and the public engagement team Lynette and Adam, and of course mostly I want to thank Nicola, Vanessa and Claudia for their excellent contributions. Everyone please do look at the An Even Better Arborthorn showcase online. You can contact me if you want to follow up on anything or stay in touch. And we will also be sharing the recording on our website and on our Twitter feed. So thanks everyone for an excellent event. We're really grateful that you could all come. Thank you very much. Bye everyone.